BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Neil Sleet. Good evening. Huawei says it doesn't know how its smartphones will be affected in future after Google banned it from using some of its software. But the Chinese tech giant reassured current users it would continue to provide them with security updates. The Electoral Commission is to review the way the Brexit Party receives funding. Its leader, Nigel Farage, has accused the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown of a disgusting smear after he'd questioned the way it received donations. The World Food Programme has warned it may suspend operations in Yemen because some rebel Houthi leaders are interfering with the distribution of aid. The inquest into the London Bridge and Borough Market attacks has heard how a Spanish banker tried to protect others by beating the assailants with his skateboard before he was stabbed to death. As we've come on air, Manchester City's triumphant men's and women's football teams are parading the 6 trophies they've won this season on an open-topped bus tour. The world's second-largest manufacturer of smartphones, China's Huawei, has said it will continue to provide security updates and other services for all its existing devices, despite being barred from using some Google software in its products. But the telecoms giant admitted it was uncertain how its phones and tablet computers might be affected if the issue wasn't resolved in the coming months. It's thought users may not get some software updates, and certain apps could stop working. Google said it had suspended cooperation with the Chinese firm after President Trump added Huawei to a list of companies that American businesses can't trade with unless they have a special license. Our technology correspondent Rory Catlin-Jones has been looking at how the dispute will affect consumers.
Just a few years ago, Huawei was a powerful player in the telecoms equipment market, but virtually unknown to most mobile phone users. Now it's number 2 in global phone sales, and 3 million people in the UK have bought a Huawei handset in the last year. But Google's move to comply with an American government order to cease dealing with the Chinese company has put that growth at risk. Current Huawei users should see little change in their access to Google's apps and its Android operating system. But Kate Bevan of Which Computing says it's future customers who need to be worried.
They probably won't be getting a future version of Android beyond the current one. They probably won't be getting security patches beyond the current version of Android as well, and that's a real concern. They also probably won't get Google Mail, Google Maps, YouTube, Google Pay, Google Photos, all of those things that are hardwired into Android.
While Huawei has always denied America's allegations that it poses a security threat, being shut out of the Android operating system, which runs on 90% of the world's smartphones, casts a shadow over its future. But Huawei's UK Executive Vice President Jeremy Thompson says the company has been preparing for this moment.
We are developing parallel operating systems. While we invest $14 billion a year in R&D, we'd rather work with Android. If it doesn't happen in the future, then we have an alternative in place which we think will delight our customers.
The United States has been pressing the UK to shut Huawei out of the new 5G mobile phone networks. Now, in this battle over trade and security, the stakes have been raised even higher, and mobile phone shoppers have been caught in the crossfire.
Shares in American technology companies have fallen as investors reacted to the restrictions on Huawei and a possible escalation of the trade war between the US and China. Google's parent company, Alphabet, dropped by more than 2%, and firms that sell billions of dollars worth of computer chips to Huawei are also down. Our correspondent in Washington, Nick Bryant, considers why the Chinese company has such a prominent role in the dispute between the world's 2 largest economies.
Reining in Huawei is central to the Trump administration's attempts to curb the rise of China. Part of a strategy of technological containment from an America-first president whose approach to trade is defined by protectionism and economic nationalism, part of what increasingly has the feel of a commercial Cold War. Donald Trump last week declared a national emergency and claimed the action against Huawei was to defend America's cyber security. But the accusation that the company's technology could be used to spy on the United States drew this strong response from Liu Kang, the spokesman for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
The United States assumes that others all harbour the same hidden agenda as they do. They attempt to spread rumours and smear other countries' enterprises in order to gain unfair competitive advantages, but can't show any evidence for their claims.
The worry in the US tech sector is that the Trump administration's protectionism will boomerang. Huawei is the world's largest provider of telecom equipment and a huge customer for semiconductor suppliers such as Intel, whose stock price dropped today. Emily Taylor, the editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy at Chatham House, says this could harm American companies that have been supplying Huawei.
It could quite well backfire, and this is the risk of protectionist policies in a global supply chain. The Huawei handset market is enormous, and so to bar Google products from that market could affect Google as well.
Then there's the political cost away with the presidential election looming next year. Many of Donald Trump's supporters back his hardline approach to China, even though it's hit them in the pocket. Will that remain true if the trade war escalates further?
The Electoral Commission is to visit the offices of the Brexit Party tomorrow to review how it records the donations it receives. The former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown has accused it of receiving a large amount of money via small, undeclared, untraceable payments. But the party's leader, Nigel Farage, described the claim as a disgusting smear. Our political correspondent, Jessica Parker, reports.
Under UK law, political parties don't have to report donations of under £500 to the Electoral Commission. Larger sums must be shown to come from, for example, a UK voter or a UK-registered company. But those rules don't apply to smaller contributions. Speaking at an event in Glasgow, Gordon Brown called on the Electoral Commission to investigate the Brexit Party, claiming that there was no way of telling whether smaller donations via the website PayPal came from British or foreign sources.
Democracy is undermined if we have undeclared, unreported, untraceable payments being made to the Brexit Party, if we have the potential for underhand and under-the-counter payments being made.
Other political parties, like Labour and the Conservatives, also use PayPal to collect donations. PayPal itself said it couldn't comment on the details of customers' accounts. While out campaigning, Nigel Farage hit back at the criticism, saying it smacked of jealousy and that most of the money raised by his party was from people giving £25 to become a registered supporter.
Absolutely disgusting smear. I mean, this from the man who was part of a Labour Party who, through Lord Levy, were, shall we say, making a lot of big donors members of the House of Lords. How dare! How dare he!
The Electoral Commission said that, like other parties, the Brexit Party had to comply with laws requiring any donation over £500 to be from a permissible source. It said it would review the systems the party has in place to receive funds. The laws on party donations were written nearly 20 years ago, and there have been suggestions that the legislation is no longer fit for the 21st century.
A milkshake was thrown at Nigel Farage while he was campaigning in Newcastle. Covered in the drink from head to toe, he abandoned the walkout and was led away by security. A 32-year-old man has been arrested. The Prime Minister will tomorrow present to her Cabinet a plan for her final attempt to deliver Brexit. MPs will vote on what Theresa May described as her new and bold deal in the first week of next month, but her critics maintain that nothing fundamental has changed. But as our political correspondent Chris Mason reports, in a sign of the leadership contest to come, potential candidates are becoming increasingly candid about their ambitions and their ideas.
Downing Street's strategy now speaks to the two fundamental truths it faces. It has run out of better ideas, and the Prime Minister has almost run out of time. The most apparently straightforward ways of assembling a majority, firstly relying on your own side, secondly relying on your opponents, have both proved tortuous and, ultimately, not worked. So, instead, a final attempt to rustle up the numbers in a more ad hoc fashion, but an effort nearly universally expected to fail. Sources say Theresa May will unveil what's described as her new Brexit deal to her Cabinet tomorrow. She's expected to give a speech on it later this week. There'll be a direct attempt to woo Labour MPs with measures on workers' rights and the environment. But the Labour leadership is dismissive, and Conservative Brexiteers point out the backstop, the insurance policy to ensure the border on the island of Ireland remains open, is unchanged. Meanwhile, in a further illustration that power and attention is leaching away from Mrs May, those vying to replace her or influence who does are becoming more vocal. The former Cabinet Minister Esther McVey is among the hopefuls. She advocates cutting spending on overseas aid to 2010 levels and channelling the billions of pounds of savings to the police and education. She has set up a group aimed at working class voters called Blue Collar Conservatism.
A majority of these voters voted to leave the EU, and on this we have broken their trust. To win that trust back, we must only not just deliver what we promised, but we must be prepared to have radical conservative agenda to show that we are on their side.
Tonight, the Daily Telegraph is hosting what amounts to a leadership hustings featuring Ministers Matt Hancock, Liz Truss and Dominic Raab, among others. And a group of Tory MPs calling itself the One Nation Caucus meets this evening for the first time. The Conservative backbencher, Sir Nicholas Soames.
I think it's unlikely that we would support someone who was in favour of no deal. But we're not being prescriptive about it. The point is that everyone now claims to be a one-nation Conservative, which is always actually very encouraging, from the sort of lunatic fringe of my party to the centre.
The group is dominated by MPs who voted Remain. The jostling and jockeying that'll shape who is our next Prime Minister is step